Okay. All right, guys, we're live. So, and we will see people starting to show up in about 2 minutes.
Okay. Did you want me to turn the mic off now?
No, you can. Yeah. Why don't the two Bryans and John? Oh, there we go. Their numbers are starting to show up already. If you guys want to mute for now, I'm going to start this. I'm going to say hello here in about 2 minutes. Okay, folks, we see people from Gimli, from Lloydminster, and other places around the country. Welcome to everyone. And hopefully we're going to have a really good session tonight. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. I'll be introducing our three presenters very shortly. We've got Brian Douglas and John Porter from Lake Country Airways. We also have Brian, the Dunker guy from out west, who's going to be talking to us later in the evening. Welcome, Denis from Sept-Îles and Stephen from Gimli. We're up to 227 folks. All right, gents, if you want to put your microphones on, and Brian, you can put up the first slide. It's 7 p.m. Welcome, Juan from Chilliwack. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to our float seminar this evening. We've got, as I said earlier, we've got Brian Douglas, John Porter, and Brian the Dunker guy all with us this evening. So, bonjour à tous. And Brian, there I see you've got the first slide up. So this is our seasonal float flight review and water egress. Key considerations. I'll let each of Brian and John introduce themselves when they start. And Bryan Webster do the same later on. I'm going to go off camera and turn the floor over to Brian and John.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just want to make sure, Peter, you give me the thumbs up that you can hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Super. Thanks very much. My name is Bryan Douglas. I'm a flight instructor and obviously a float plane enthusiast here in Ottawa. I've been teaching at the Rockcliffe Flying Club and now as a seasonal instructor for Lake Country Airways. And it's really our pleasure tonight, the three of us, our three friends, for inviting us to speak about our passions, which is flying float planes safely. And we're going to talk, obviously, about the seasonal float checkout flight and the water egress. I'm very, very pleased that John and Brian are with me, as both have much more experience than I do. I'm limited to my observations as a flight instructor and doing basic ratings and some advanced flying. My goal has always been to produce safe seaplane pilots, so you won't hear any tips from me on bush piloting. But we do hope that everybody can take away a few gems and to make you really think and reflect, and that would make our time this evening really, really worthwhile. The fine weather has already allowed a lot of us to be up in our float planes by now. And perhaps we could have done this a couple of months ago. But as we all know, good pilots are always learning. So we'll launch on that. We're going to follow this format. I'll cover a few notes on before the flight review. John will cover the seasonal checkout flight. I'll cover a little bit on after that checkout flight. We'll open it up for questions and answers that you can send to Peter as the moderator. Bryan Webster will cover the water egress and questions and answers, and then we'll have a final wrap up and any other final questions. So before the flight, it's been a long time over the winter, and so there's a few maybe motherhood statements we could cover at this point. First, as the pilot itself, please make sure your ADB is current, it's signed, your medical is current, and if you were lucky to get your rating over the last little while, you want to double check that your license is showing that you've got the Seaplane rating there too. As far as an aircraft, we want to make sure that the insurance is current. You may have not been in those document bags for a while. And we want to make sure that all the out-of-phase inspections, the dates, the 2-year certifications, for example, are already covered. Okay. On the survival kit itself, this is a good time to refresh your survival kit. That is putting in new batteries, replacing any medication that you may have in your survival kit, and any food and water supplements. It's also time that you can consider to add to your survival kit by having a spot tracker, a personal locator beacon, perhaps even a handheld SATCOM or radio, a handheld VHF radio, and maybe even some flares. That all again to aid in quickly being located in case there are issues with your flight. I also remind people at this time to make sure you have your bug spray, as sometimes that's not in our survival kits, saw, hatchet, painkillers. And I still remember the COPA convention in Kelowna a few years back, where a number of British Columbian pilots took their airplane survival kits and did a little 24-hour exercise armed only with their survival kits, and the comments on how to improve their survival kits after living with them really made us think about how we can improve our own survival kits. Your ELT obviously would have to be tested. You haven't flown over the winter, remembering the performance test is done every 2 years, and the operational test, which is the self-test, is done annually. It's a good chance to also look at your personal flotation devices, making sure that they're serviceable and that any CO2 cartridges that are in there have been either replaced or checked for serviceability, and a number of survival companies will actually weigh those cartridges to see if they're still going to be effective. It's also a good idea to think about carrying some of your survival kit with you. So on my PFD, I'm very lucky to have a couple of pouches, and so I put a couple of key items in here. The survival equipment on the airplane, if you can't get to it, is camping equipment. You have your survival kit with you. The key items: water purification, candles, matches, your signal mirror. You'll be much better served. Now, the next topic is the current water Aerodrome supplements. If you're a for-flight user, this is the time now to go onto the document section and upload the document section onto your device, your iPad, iPhone, whatever tablet you are using. And it's also a great time to look at some of those seaplane bases you've been to or ones you may wish to go to for changes since last season. I see in the Ontario region that there's a new seaplane base, for example, at Constance Lake, just south of Bancroft. And the AWS is a valuable tool, especially looking for noise-sensitive areas so that we can be good neighbors on the lakes, as well as the contact numbers to find out those nuances on the local knowledge of the lakes. It's a great time also to rehearse your passenger brief and your own safety egress. We sometimes get so used to this that we forget how important that briefing is. You can use the Transport Canada TP12365. Later on, I have a picture of it on the presentation to help shape your presentation. You'll see that they stress the use of shoulder belts, obviously, and gives you an idea to think twice about rear passengers, especially the difficulty of water egress in some of our aircraft. Speaking of water egress, it's going to be covered obviously by Bryan in the second part of today's seminar. And it's just a good suggestion to visualize your own egress and with your eyes closed. We do this on the basic ratings just to ensure the pilots remember exactly where their door handle is, how that door opens, and how to remove your seatbelt without looking. And it's really, really handy, especially for those who fly multiple aircraft, sometimes on the same day. The last point I'd like to cover is reviewing the POH. Obviously, before we fly, we should remember what our recommended airspeeds are and configuration for normal, glassy water, rough water, and constrained lakes, takeoffs and landings, and remembering what our key speeds are, VX, VY, VA, and our stall speeds in various configurations. Also, before we fly, we should think about our upper air skills and procedures for your aircraft. For example, steep turns for traffic avoidance, spiral recovery, slow flight, power off, and power on stalls. And it's always fun taking up new students who are old pilots. And when we do our upper air, quite a few of them often comment, that's the first time I've done a power off stall since my PPL 20 years ago. So that sends a little message to myself that this is the kind of stuff that we want to just feel comfortable with. Also with the POH is a great chance to review the recommended emergency procedures for your aircraft, forced landings, precautionary, electrical failures that may then cause a no-flap landing or a no-flap takeoff. Obviously, changes to your weight and balance of the aircraft over the winter if you've added a new radio or a new battery, or as us pilots with the COVID-19. And finally, this is a great chance to practice some examples with different fuel loads and common passenger configuration, including passengers in the rear seat if you carry them, as weight and balance issues are often a common denominator of float plane accidents and incidents every year, especially considering the effects of summer heat and altitude. That takes us the work to do before the checkout flight. I'll now turn the floor over to John, and I'll just mute my mic at this time. John? And for Peter, do you have John there?
Not right now. He was there, so we'll just do a little soft shoe while we're waiting for John to come back. Just a couple of questions there. One question from Pat Calley. Do you have a link for the current Aerodrome supplement? I believe that's now a digital document, eh, Brian? They have to buy that from a provider such as ForeFlight if you're using an EFB, or from Nav Canada itself.
Yeah, that's what my impression was. I know on ForeFlight it's right there on my ForeFlight. So I just
right.
download that. So, yeah.
Okay, John has rejoined us. It's nice to see you back, John. It's I think Brian's about to turn the floor over to you if he hasn't already. So up now is John Porter from the beautiful Ottawa Flying Club and also from the beautiful seaside restaurant at
Constance Lake.
Constance Lake. There he is.
Good. Well, thank you, Peter. I just wanted to thank you and COPA, Peter, for allowing us this little bit of a platform to talk to some of our peers, and to Bryan Douglas for including me. So thank you very much. So can you hear me okay? Is the mic all right?
You are loud and clear, sir, and you're cleared to go hot.
Okay, that's great. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I've been flying for quite a while, but I did my seaplane rating in Toronto probably in the late 80s. And I was so enthusiastic, I bought an old Piper J3 on 1320 floats and flew it for many years, 10 years on wheels and skis and floats, and embarrassed the heck out of myself in all configurations. I did quite a few ratings with the old J3 and really enjoyed it. Sold it. And because, by the time you fly a J3 for a long time, it turns out that you end up flying other people's airplanes a lot more than you fly your own. And so I've been very blessed in the Ottawa area to be able to fly Champs and Cessna 180s, Cessna 185, 206. And so I'm feeling a little more comfortable about a variety of airplanes and really enjoy it. So about 10 years ago, when I was back at the Ottawa Flying Club again, we had a college program with Algonquin College, and I introduced the seaplane training to the college program in aviation management. And we connected with a wonderful company called Lake Country Airways to bring an airplane in to teach our college students more about bush flying. And that's been going on now about 12 years. And that's where Bryan Douglas and I fit in and connected. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to fly together. So the main thing that we want to talk about today, my little section anyway, is check flights. And something we get a chance to do a lot this time of year. So to be honest, there's the question is, why bother doing a check flight? What's in it for me? And we hear that all the time. And very often it comes from an owner of an airplane, and they've been flying for quite a while and quite comfortable with the airplane. And sometimes that's the problem. Well, the commercial pilots and the 702s and the 703s, they've been doing check flights every year for gosh knows how long. And it does really three things. It allows the pilot to get current again. Here in Canada, very often we don't fly for 6-7 months at a time. So getting current again is certainly critical. It gives the chief pilot an opportunity to spend some time with the staff or the pilot and maybe do a little coaching, maybe find out where the weaknesses are, and to elevate their skills up a little bit. But it also meets the standards that are required by Transport Canada, as well as the operations manual for that particular company. So if you think about the commercial guys as being professional, we can be just as professional as private pilots and private owners. And so an owner or a renter of a float plane will really benefit from a check flight also. The three common seasonal types of checks that we normally do is one would be for an aircraft owner. And they stay away from their airplanes. They might have done some mods on the airplane. And, a good owner will say, why don't you come up with me and spend an hour and let's do a good checkout. And that's a really good attitude to have. The other group that we have quite a bit of is the renters. At Lake Country Airways, we're really blessed with an insurance policy that allows us to, after your seaplane rating, to be able to rent or supervise rental of the airplane. And then after 15 hours, take a passenger. So we have to do check rides on a lot of our customers in the beginning and then every 30 days or so if they get out of currency. And the last group that I've had quite a bit of is the insurance companies. The insurance companies, especially with an elderly seaplane owner, will have a full sheet of things that they want done, and it has to be submitted to keep their rate. So that's an easy one because now we have a checklist and we do that. So those three different types of checkouts are really, really beneficial as long as you put the time and effort into it. Each one of those checkouts has the same kind of common elements. So the one, as I mentioned, is currency. We all need that. One of the things that both Brian and I have really noticed over the years is that people who are really devoted to the float plane tend to stay away from airplanes in the wintertime. And when they come back out to us in the spring, we find they're a little bit rusty. When you get them current again, have a good season. The next winter, they stay away from airplanes again. Following spring, even more rusty again. And after 2 or 3 years of staying away from airplanes on wheels, we've noticed a real deterioration in some of the basic skills. So, our key message is don't just fly float planes. Get out there and fly on the wheels too. Get your night rating, get your IFR, work on your commercial, whatever is in your long-term plan. The second part is that we really want to, ensure we can continue to rent airplanes to people. So safety is always a critical issue. A good season for Lake Country is not the number of hours we did, not the number of ratings we did, but we got through the whole season successfully, safely. Everybody enjoyed themselves, and we're welcome back to Constance Lake next year. The other opportunity is for us to spend time working on best practices. We're really lucky to work with other commercial pilots who are flying floats, spend time with transport who doesn't mind sharing best practices. So we get to share those different upgraded skills to other people. And we also want to go back and refresh a lot of the stuff we did on the rating or even the advanced rating. We may have done a couple of forced approaches. That's not too many. May have done a couple of glassy waters. That gets you going. May have done a little bit of crosswinds. Not my favorite. But now it's time to get back into the saddle and do more of them. Try different ones. How many kinds of glassy water approaches are there? Quite a few. Depends on the terrain. You can do all kinds of different styles of glassy water depending on your goal. And the last thing is, if the renter or the owner is really excited, let's do some advanced stuff. Let's get into confined lakes. Let's try a little bit more of a crosswind. Let's try more step taxiing and a gentle step turn. Those are exciting things to do. So the biggest thing that we notice in the time that people are taking off is that pilots become complacent. And float plane guys or girls really tend to follow the same pattern weekend after weekend. Let's go to the camp. Let's go to the cottage. Let's go see Bill. Let's go to the camp. Let's go to the cottage. Let's go see Bill. Same thing. So getting out of the comfort zone, getting into a different lake, taking a full load of passengers, doing a hot day, glassy water, high density and altitude takeoff, those are all things that are going to stretch their imagination. When you get complacent, you become overconfident. And that's just the worst thing for float plane people. And the last thing is the currency, which we've talked about. So stay current, find a new airplane to fly a Piper Arrow, fly a Cessna 170B on wheels. Oh boy, it's really exciting. So I normally start my checkouts a week before. And most people think of a checkout as maybe an hour, but my week checkouts start a week before. And I do that with telephone calls, text messages, emails, and I start to get a feeling for what you've been doing, where you've been flying, how's the airplane going? And then I find out about the confidence, the complacency, what they've been doing. Have you done any glassy waters? Have you done any forced approach? And all this time it's just friendly conversation, but I'm designing a flight plan that's going to try to get them out of their comfort zone a little bit and go back into the refresher. I also want to know, as Brian mentioned on his slide, a little bit more about the airspeeds. Kind of a secret. I don't remember a lot of those airspeeds at my age, but I have a cheat sheet. I'll pull that out. But I ask every single pilot I ask for 5 airspeeds. I want to know your best angle of climb. I want to know your best rate of climb. I want to know your approach speed with 20-degree flaps. I want to know your glide speed, and I want to know your stall speed. And I'm going to hold you to them. So when we do a takeoff and I say, hey, there's an obstacle at the far end, what are you going to do? And a guy says, oh, I'm going to use VX. Well, what's VX? Give me a number. I know what VX is. Give me a number. Most people can't. And so if we have a number, then we can work together. And so usually about this time, I'm saying, okay, and I think it's also going to be fun to get up there and do some air work. Let's do a steep turn and a stall, and maybe we'll do a little gentle spiral recovery. And about this time, I hear a big sigh. Oh shoot, I thought this was just going to be an hour and going to have some fun, but I'm really going to put them to work for that week ahead of time. So by the time we get to the dock, we've got a pretty good plan going. We pretty much understand what we want to cover over. So taking a look at our list there that Bryan has been nice enough to provide us, arriving and departing the dock. Well, that's all a big part of it, but that's your dock probably, or your company dock. Let's go find another dock that you may not be as comfortable with. Bryan mentioned a lot of talk about passenger briefing. I'm going to ask you, what's your passenger briefing? Tell it to me. And if you reach for that card in the back of your seat, I'm going to say, well, I'd rather hear it from you. So passenger briefings are critical. Last year was a terrible year in Canada for accidents. We had so many accidents here and so many passages of people, large airplanes, multiple people. So the passenger briefing is really, really critical. And you want to get that passenger to demonstrate the type of things you're talking. The other thing that I want to reinforce is the need for a shoulder harness. We lost a very close friend last year. We lost a very close person that I miss, and because that person probably didn't have a shoulder harness on. And so, I've flown with that person quite often. I know they didn't wear the shoulder harness, but that V-brace is sitting there right there like a magnet, right for your forehead. And the shoulder harness, he would be sitting with us on this podcast right now if it wasn't for that. So, when you can put a face to a reason, you probably will never forget that. When we're taxiing, I'm going to spend a little bit more time, not just in rough water, but how to avoid it, but also to how to turn the airplane. When you small airplanes like the old J3, 172 with the little Edo 2000s, they don't like to turn very easily with a 15-knot wind. So that takes some extra practice. With the takeoff, yeah, we're going to do some normal takeoff to set the benchmark. We're going to do a couple of confined lake takeoffs. But now I want to go back and say, well, it's going to be a really hot summer this year. It's going to feel like 35. It's going to have glassy water. We're going to take your mother-in-law up and put her in the back seat. Let's see how that high density takeoff goes and see what your mother-in-law thinks about that. And so that's just another thing that we're going to add to that. Precautionaries, holy Hannah, you should see the logs we got up here in Quebec right now. We have to literally dance around Lac Poisson-Blanc and the Gatineau River to get around the logs. And the 185 that I'm flying has got those composite floats, and I'm sure he's going to share the bill with me if we prang a float. So I'm not going to pay that bill. Glassy water, I mentioned that there's more than one way to do that. Bryan and I got up and did some glassy water a couple of days ago. He's got one way to do it. I've got one way to do it. We shared a couple of new ways. It's so much fun to get up with another pilot and say, oh, look at this we can do here. See that point there? That's our last known reference point. Look at that marsh. You can come on over the marsh at 10 feet. There's so many different things that you can do with the glassy water. And that's the fun that Bryan and I have together when we're doing our flights. The forced approach, nobody enjoys that. Try it from 500 feet. But my only key message is, and that's because I flew an antique Piper J3 and I've got likely 6 or 7 forced or partial approaches, man, stay near the water. It's just a power off landing if you're near the water. So just plan your flights so that you've always got an opportunity to land. The Piper J3 was a 1947 with a nice old Continental, but it had a mind of its own. And, I respect that a lot, and that's why I'm still enjoying the float flying. The last thing, here in Ottawa, we had a mid-air. Fortunately, nobody got killed last year. One of them was a float plane. Both of them were using the radio somewhat, not as much as they could, but high-wing Cessna, another high-wing, I think it was a Champ on floats. They collided big time. The Champ lost most of its tail, made it into the water upright, then nosed over, person got out. But it's a CNBC environment, and we've got to respect the other people's rights to fly too. So my very basic message, my only takeaway that I'm asking you to think about is to please commit to doing one checkout flight per year. That's all, just one checkout flight. Pick a flight instructor, a commercial pilot, or a Transport Canada approved instructor that you like, that has experience, and who's flexible. And that flexibility will allow you to share what you know, because you know more about your airplane than any other instructor, and share those things so you both learn something. So an instructor has to be knowledgeable, experienced, and flexible. that's all I've got to say. I truly hope we see you on the dock. We've got the best black flies and mosquitoes that you can enjoy right here. So Bryan and I would love to see you at Constance Lake at some point. And I'm going to stick around. I want to hear Bryan, the Dunker Guy's Egress. I took that course 10 years ago, and I still repeat his mantra every single flight. So Bryan, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thanks very much for that, John. I'll just finish this portion before we open it up for questions and answers. So after your seasonal checkout, consider other advanced training that you can do throughout the season, as John was mentioning. Obviously, consider formal water egress training. I too have taken Bryan's course a couple of times now, and as a commercial pilot, obviously I have to start doing that, as all commercial pilots starting next year. This is a great chance to purchase the new equipment that I mentioned that you may want to have on board to increase your own survivability, as well as a number of really, really good reference books on seaplane flying that you can use to increase your own, to improve your own professional knowledge of float plane flying. And finally, use the FSS for our weather briefings. Each year, float planes and other planes get into marginal weather, and it's a common element of float plane accidents. So, Peter, this would be your great time to come in there now and see if there are any questions for us that we can maybe discuss before we hand over to Bryan and the water egressing.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Bryan and John both for an excellent presentation so far. I got a few compliments from for both of you from some of our audience of the right now 363 participants. One comment back from John's comment: "Don't fly with your mother-in-law." Understood. A couple other humorous things about that. People want to know what the seaplane float plane passenger guide was. I've given them that. It's a 12365. That's TP 12365. Water supplement is free on Flight Plan Go if you don't want to pay for it by other means. If you're going to use that Flight Plan Go app, it's a great little app. And yes, we are being recorded, and it will show up in a few days on YouTube. So that's about it for questions. There was nothing really else that I see so far, and I guess it just speaks to the quality of the presenters. So if you want to go ahead, if you have any sort of predestined questions that you guys wanted to ask yourselves, Kevin Brown says, "I'd be interested in tips taxiing in strong winds." So there you go, John and Bryan.
Go ahead, Bryan. That's a good one for you.
Yeah, well, I think the first tip I would offer is to be very careful when you're going to be turning upwind to downwind. That's what probably catches us, and you will often see float planes out on the water, rocking back and forth and really putting themselves into a precarious situation. So, turning to the left obviously is always the best. Slingshot to get around. The very deliberate use of short bursts of power to help that aircraft come around would be useful. The importance of sailing when you actually realize that you cannot turn around in those strong winds, and that I am going to do either power on sailing or power off sailing and just forget about turning around. I think if more people would do that, we wouldn't see the float planes dancing on the water. Always, always, always yoke all the way back, protect that propeller, and you will get spray, but try to minimize that. And finally, look for places on the lake where the wind and the fetch isn't quite as bad. So plan your routes to minimize the wind. Again, it's a great time to practice that with an instructor or a seasoned float plane pilot. John, you probably have a few more tips to add.
No, that was really complete, Brian. I appreciate that, but I want to reinforce your desire in the turn. That little book on how to fly floats has got a really good diagram. Looks like a question mark. That's what you refer to there. And as you're going around the top in the left-hand turn, holding your ailerons in the right direction. But what Brian said was just short bursts of power. And I didn't learn that until later. But boy, does that make a difference? It keeps the rudders from stretching out. It keeps you from going a little bit too fast and making them ineffective. And it helps the air rudder to kind of get you around.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing that I would add is at some point, make a mental note of what's too strong. At what point does not the airplane want to turn? And then just avoid it. Don't force it to turn. Do the sailing that Brian recommended. And so for a 172, 15 gusting to 20, that's pretty much all that girl wants. Piper J3, same as Brian's Luscombe, maybe about 10 knots in my experience. I see people put 2 water rudders on their Luscombes in the J3 and then go out and tackle more wind. I think, oh, okay, go at it. But yeah, Brian was right on the money with that. Thank you.
I got, gents, I got 2 other questions for you. John Peterson asks, what life jackets are required? I guess he's talking about the type of life jacket. And I've got one after that.
Brian, you know more about that one. We have new ones this year, I guess.
Well, yeah, for our commercial operations, and of course, Bryan Webster is the expert on that part, but for commercial operations, yes, we have to use a Department of Transport approved PFDs for us commercial pilots as well as our passengers on commercial aircraft. I think the key point, though, and I do see some of our students that want to wear their own PFDs, and there has to be a real, pay real close attention to how that PFD is activated, and it must be manually activated, not water activated. That will get us in a lot of trouble if that PFD inflates. So I'm always careful to look at that person's PFD before I let them come on board. There are many that you can get at some of the commercial providers, some of the survival companies. Here in Ottawa, we have Capital Survival that sells a number of Switliks and other types. Aircraft Spruce sells them as well. I like the ability to attach safely pouches, small pouches that I can put my own survival equipment in as well. And perhaps, Bryan Webster, you might have something you can jump in here, sir?
Yeah, for me personally, hello everybody. And I'm sure there's more than one COPA member I've trained, so good to see you all. What it comes down to is the regulations are brand new. They're going to come into effect here in the next few weeks. And just recently, they decided that they'd approved a life vest that unfortunately wouldn't have done well at all. And what it was is they put in a type 3 versus type 3, meaning it would have actually inflated when it hit water. So what I'm doing personally is I'm not going to say too much about life vests until the regulations are in place and we have the document that has been basically scrutinized, and then we all know that it's going to be the right thing to do. My understanding for what I've seen so far is they've got a fairly wide variety, and Mustangs in the game as well as you said, Switlik and many others. So you just have to find what's comfortable for you, but thoroughly understand and appreciate you never have anything aboard an airplane that'll inflate when it hits water.
I think I would add one other point too, and that is I think you have to wear it. You can't just have it in the back of the aircraft, because when things go wrong, it's going to go wrong violently and quickly.
Yes.
And I think you need that. And I learned that from Brian's course that there's a good chance you may only have one working arm left as you're leaving the aircraft, and that's not the time to be looking for your PFD. So certainly in our operation, when we're teaching basic ratings or anytime we fly in our aircraft as part of the company, everyone wears their life vest. You don't know when you're going to need it.
That's right. And on that note, Brian, there will be some resistance from many people in that area. And there's reasons for good, to wear them and not to wear them. But Transport Canada would dictate when the new life vest regulations come out, you're going to have to wear them as a commercial operator. To me, I'm I'm torn both ways because I've seen accident reports and I've been around many people who've been in accidents. So there are times that they're very beneficial and others that not so much. And it's more from the point of view that if you buy a device that has a lot of screen on it, in other words, you're mentioning pockets. Pockets are great, but we had a real sad situation out here with search and rescue where they basically flipped over a small dirigible boat, and the vest had mesh on the sides, and it actually penetrated one of the metal objects on the boat, tow bar, and the person, not just one, but two people drowned because of it. So from that point of view, be very cautious what you buy. My advice there is, and it's up to anybody's guess, is have something that's slippery on the sides, not too many pockets that can grab things. And I've witnessed everything you can imagine underwater for over 22 years. And anything that's left out hanging, be it a buckle or anything else, will get stuck on something. It's not it might, it will. And that's not the time to have those things take place.
Right, good advice. Got one more question for now from Luc Vachon. He's talking about a Cessna 180 certified for spins and wheels configuration. Is it the same when it's on floats? I think I know the answer, but I'll let you guys answer it. I would suspect that no, you definitely don't want to be spinning a float-equipped airplane.
No, Peter, you're 100% right. A lady that you remember, Peter, Lorna Dublicki,
Yep.
Wonderful lady up our way here, used to spin those back in the 50s and 60s. And of course, that was all okay back then. And she said there was really no issue with it. But it's been a long time since we cannot spin any float plane. It doesn't matter if it's a 185 or a Piper J3. It's I've never done it, so I can't speak from experience. But it used to be done back in the 50s and 60s when they were much braver than I. But you're right, we cannot do it.
Doesn't make them smarter. One last question from Nick Evans. What are some walk-around items that you find that more experienced, brackets, complacent pilots miss?
Well, Nick, it's nice to hear you on. Hope you're enjoying your new airplane. For me, the things that people are missing are a complacency with leaky floats. People very often say my floats are dry, they don't leak, and yet they're getting 5-6 strokes out of it, maybe even a little bit more. And yet they're not getting their AME to work on it. They're not bucking the rivets themselves. They're not finding the issue. And that one day is going to hurt when you're doing that high density gross weight and you're carrying an extra 100 pounds of water. Propellers. We spend the whole season protecting those propellers, and the best thing you can put on a set of floats are those splash guards on the inside of the front bows. And you'd be silly not to do it on a personal airplane. We do it on the commercial airplanes, and that saves the propeller. We just put $8,000 onto a prop 2 days ago at the Ottawa Flying Club. So the fixed propeller is doggone expensive right now. In your own personal vest, making sure those canisters are replaced every year. Don't depend on it. Well, I didn't use it last year, so it must be okay. So in your Mustang vest, replace those canisters. They're not that expensive. So those are the little things that I see. Every person has their own desire to have the airplane and what they do with it. And they go up to the camp, they go up to fishing, but it's the basic things that are going to bite them. Replacing that battery after 4 years, so you can go 7 years with that airplane. But if you're up in Diswisha and now your battery's dead, hand swinging a 185 is well past my pay grade. Get that battery replaced every 4 years or so. That's just off the top of my head. You guys want to add something else?
I would add rigging anytime to look for, especially the water rudder cables, and underneath the belly of the airplane where the water rudder cables go through the belly, and you can get some wear in there, and you don't want your that cable to break. And sometimes we tend not to look underneath the belly. We just look at the water rudders and the cables as they go to the air rudders. So I would say underneath the belly, take a good look at how your cable looks there.
Right on. Thanks, Brian. I got one last one, then we'll move on to Brian's part of this. From Mark Talbot, can you please comment on downwind landings? I fly a Cessna 185. We would like to know what the maximum downwind would be considered safe for a downwind landing on a Cessna 185?
Not going there.
Okay, I had a similar answer myself, John.
Zip.
I had an interesting example this weekend. We were flying and the winds were low, 1 knot, maybe 2 at the most. It was a lot of glass, and so we made the decision that at the worst case it'd be a 1 knot landing, a tailwind. And wouldn't you know it, just as we were in the hold off, we got a nice gust. I then checked later with the Netar up at Ottawa, and it looked like I had about a 7 knot tailwind, and that was very uncomfortable. Once I had put the floats on the water, that tail really wanted to go up, and I had the oh darn response from the student. So when I teach it, I say avoid it. Take off into the wind, land into it.
Yeah, the big fear with a downwind landing is really threefold. Number one, you heard Brian mention that the tail came up a little bit. You don't have the same elevator effectiveness, and so you may not get the same pitch rotation on landing, and therefore you're landing a little more flat. You're landing at a faster speed, so your hydrodynamic drag is increased. Your pitch downward is increased because the landing flat, plus you got the higher speed, and you don't have as much elevator control. Is it survivable? Sure, lots of people will demonstrate it, and you see it. Just go to Oshkosh. Go to Oshkosh, stay in that little bay where all these seaplanes land. You'll see lots of downwind landings and lots of really scary events. But do we teach it? No, we don't teach it, and I wouldn't recommend a particular airspeed to do it at. So it's just one of those things that should be avoided if you can at all do it.
Okay, I got one more, and then I will turn it over to you, John, or sorry, to Brian. From Mindy Bing, how hard is it to put floats on a 182 Alpha? What is a good kit that works well?
I don't have an answer to that, but I've flown a number of 182s, and they are an outstanding float plane. They are just a wonderful personal float plane, a nice 3-person, maybe even 4 if the kids are a little smaller. It's a real nice float plane. It's worth doing the research of, but I don't have a kit number in mind.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, I think at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Bryan Webster, also known as Brian the Dunker Guy, and we'll take it back to his presentation. Thanks for all your answers so far, guys. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you guys, John, Brian, and Peter, and all the COPA people out there I've met and are yet to meet. I don't have a script and I don't have a basic file as our other two fellows have, so I'm just going to wing it. And what I'd rather do is not get too long-winded on this end, but more answer questions as they come in at the end of it, if that's okay. So I'll just start. Originally, I learned to fly back in 1975 at Pitt Meadows Airport, just out of Vancouver. And as the story goes, I was on a Fleet Canuck. I was having a great time. I had about 35 hours. And of course, when you're young and you want to fly anything that goes, I managed to get into a Cessna 150 with a fellow. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard this story, but I'll repeat it anyway. And what happened is we ended up coming back after doing aerobatics, as it was an aerobatic machine. And we're heading back into the sunshine late in the evening in August. And lo and behold, we're down low having a great time following the Fraser River. And out of the blue, there's 16 power lines right in front of us. So the pilot at the controls, he was seasoned. He was actually, it sounds funny nowadays, but he was ex-World War II. And he was also an aerobatic instructor. And he tried to go over them in the first place, but that didn't work. So he basically jammed the nose straight down, and we did a vertical drop at high speed, full power, rounded out at the bottom. And unfortunately, it was high tide that day on the Fraser. And we contacted the water at high speed, well over 100 miles an hour. Did one flop on the back. The front window ejected, luckily for both of us. The doors were knocked completely wide open and wrapped right around the wing struts. And so we both were upside down, sinking, and the water was coming up my nose about the time that I came to, as we'd both been knocked out. When I finally got my composure and went out the door, ran around the other side really quick, and it was probably about 15 feet deep water. So the airplane was still on the surface at that point. And as the story goes, I got him and reached in, undid the safety harness, which was a military quick release, and he floated out in my arms. From there on, off to shore, and then a quick sort of a run through the hospital. But from that accident, when I only had 35 hours, I learned a great deal. And then I went to the bush after that. 1978, I was commercially operating a 185 with 255 hours, which is ridiculous to think of it now, but I did. And I was flying a bush operation out of Whitehorse, off Schwatka Lake. And after a few years of flying from Whitehorse, I ended up, and I wanted to be an operator, so I went to Dawson City, which is just north of there. And I got a hold of, basically through some, I'll call it interesting financing with the bank, I got a hold of a Beaver, a 206, I leased a 172, and as well, we had my little, at that time, Luscombe. So we had quite a wide variety of little airplanes. From there, I ended up about 3 years in operation before I found out there's not a whole lot of money in that end of the flying business. And I sold it to another fellow, and I headed over to a little place called Fort Smith, which not a lot of people know about, but nevertheless, it's up in the sort of the northern regions of BC, right on the Northwest Territory and Alberta border. And there I got some real good exposure to float planes. We flew everything that was a dock. It didn't matter if it was a Beaver, 185, 206, whatever. And as well, I did bird dogging for water bombers. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I've flown a lot of different airplanes, and each one has its own idiosyncrasies. From there over to Yellowknife, and that's where I got into the IFR world. So we'd fly bush all day with whatever was tied to the dock, and then we'd be down in Wyoming that evening in a Beech 200. After about 4 years of that, I ended up in Edmonton, and I was working for Federal Express, and they just got the Caravans. They're brand new at that time, and I'd flown Caravans, so I ended up with basically a type rating, and I did all the check flights for many, many years for Federal Express. From Edmonton to Victoria, and now I've been here where I'm sitting in this room for 30 years, just about right now. So anyway, that's kind of my background. How did I get into egress training? Well, you heard the first story. Then as the years went on, I was flying the Caravan across Vancouver, Victoria. I did over 10,000 crossings. And one afternoon, unfortunately, an airplane ended up in the water halfway in bad weather. And the Transport Canada inspector of the day called me up because we, of course, were in the air at the time it happened, but not on that exact spot, and said, you know, why did this happen? Why did you take the route you took and this other individual ended up in the water? So from that experience, I said to him, well, what I think we really need out here, to be honest, because we have a lot of float planes that have ended up in the water in the BC coast and as well Ontario and everywhere else in between. And I said flat out, I think what we really need is, in those days, it was called ditch training. And he said, well, I happen to know you've been in one, so why don't you put a program together? So I went to the FedEx heads and I said, guys, I think we really need to train our pilots. They are single engine. And we are, at that time, flying over a dozen of them across Canada. And one in particular had an engine problem not too far of Winnipeg en route, just past one of the stops, and almost had to put down in Atikokan with an engine failure. So after that, they were gung-ho, and they said, yep, I think we need egress training, as we call it today. So one thing led to another, and after about 3 years of from when I'd started egress training in 1998 until just a few years later, I got so busy that literally we couldn't, as a family, I couldn't keep flying and as well egress training because the demand was so high. Since that time, we've trained 8,000 people. Out of that 8,000, we've now had 44 that they basically state that we were either directly responsible or very helpful in saving their lives. 23 of them being the pilots, who have all survived, and the rest being passengers. So it does work, and there's no questions asked. It's a very hands-on kind of an experience. If you take the training in a pool, you're underwater, you're in a cage, and if you don't like water, that's more of a reason to come to us. We have handled literally every type of an individual you can imagine. And I've personally been on every single course for the last 22 years in 63 separate locations. So we've seen the behavior over and over of how people react, and I've got it pretty well figured out. But in any event, you do have to take it serious. If you want to take egress training online, that's available through my website. You can look it up. That's not my intent here today, but just to let you know that is there. And as soon as COVID is back under control, I'm listening to our health minister here on the 15th of next month, being June, we should be able to get back into the pools again. And we've been right across Canada. I've been to Toronto at least 75 times and everywhere in between, many. So my hope is that by fall we'll have got a good chunk of the people back into the training world, and it's been mandated now by commercial operators for February 6th of next year. So everybody's going to have to do it. And again, we're going to make ourselves as able as we can possibly to be around the country. So why would you want to take Egress training? Well, I'll tell you, it's no different than if you have an engine fire, engine failure. You were talking earlier about practicing stalls and spins. If you find yourself in an upside down aircraft, it's a world you've never entered. Everything will be foreign to you, left and right or backwards. You're basically, especially in colder water, you are prone to a more difficult egress than in the summertime. And you've got to figure that we start flying floats in the spring, and as soon as the ice is off in many places of Canada, and then again, we fly them right through until the ice comes back. So on either end of the spectrum, you've got extremely cold water. What it comes down to is if you've got the training, your chances of survival are very good. If you do not, then I don't want to give the numbers because everyone always disputes it, but it's not anywhere near the same. And just looking at basically the people that are out here today, I know at least a dozen that are probably watching this right now that we've been instrumental in meeting training and then afterwards had an incident. So we've had calls repeatedly. Every single time somebody has ended up underwater, they've called, and we've discussed in great detail to make sure that we can learn as well from those instances. So all I'd like to say, and then I'd rather go on to question and answers and continue rambling, is take it serious. When you go out in the springtime, as the guys were just saying, if you haven't had a check flight, you're rusty. And there's no way of describing it any other way. What used to just be verbatim, you jumped in, you found out where all the instruments were at a glance, you knew everything, and all of a sudden, everything's slowed down. You're not anywhere near as crisp as you were. And as both the guys said earlier, complacency does step into it as well. So it's both ends of that spectrum. But what I always say, just to end, is there's three demons on board every airplane, and there has been since the Wright brothers. Number one is Mother Nature, and she can throw everything at you and some more. And I've flown well over 12,000 hours, and I've been in numerous situations that were very doubtful as to what the outcome would be. The second being, of course, mechanical. And I'm not saying that airplanes are unsafe. That's not my intent. But be prepared, because if something does act up, it normally happens at the worst time, which is takeoff and landing. So with the guys saying you should practice your stalls and this, that, and the other, truly practice them, especially for an immediate departure with an engine failure. That's the big one. You have to get the nose down. I was a commercial operator, and I've done test flights and training for years and years and years, as well as flight training on floats. And you literally have to jam the elevator down and get that thing heading downhill if you're in the climb at, say, 300 feet and the engine quits, because you don't have time to think about it. And if you procrastinate, it's just going to come down like an elevator and slam onto the water. And then, of course, the third, I won't call demon, but individual that can cause grief is the pilot. We can all make mistakes. We can all be tired, complacent, have personal issues going on. But when you get out of an airplane, whether it's commercial or private, you're still at the controls, and you have people depending on you. So you have to be able to wash out the rest of the world and use your skills, use your training. And in those words, just remain professional, even though you might be a lower time pilot in private. Always, always do your best and try hard to follow a syllabus, a checklist, whatever the case is. And don't get yourself into these situations. Don't push the weather. Don't push your luck. If you're in a J3, don't go into knee-high water. They're not meant for that. That's for a beaver. So with that being said, I'll just sign off now. And if you want to do questions and answers, that'd be just perfect for me. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn it. Keep it with you, Brian. I'm just going to get back to my chat page here. Okay, so Chris Both asked how to best land a trigger or tricycle gear plane safest into the water.
Okay, it's been done many times.
Yes, I'm sure.
The first thing is don't run out of gas, have mechanical failure, and end up in the water, push whatever it was that caused that. Should you be in that position, and what I'd like to do is back up just a little bit, and I'll do this in our classes, but start at say, we'll call it 1,000 feet. If you have an engine issue or whatever's going to cause the problem at 1,000 feet, you have roughly a minute before you've made contact with water in the bulk of the airplanes, being is that your descent rate is going to be about 700 or 800 feet per minute. So you've got a little bit of time. And first thing you do is identify the problem. So what I always say is basically is go through your procedure, and right off the bat, it's what's my problem? How do I solve it? And then go through and get everything in order as fast as you can. And I could go through a long song and dance, but if you really want the whole business, you should take the training or do something different for egress training online. But what it comes down to is, first off, once you've identified the problem, there's no way it's going to be restarted or seized, whatever the case is, or you're out of gas. Now you call somebody who cares, get on the downhill slide, and as the guys were saying earlier, know your descent angles verbatim. Don't go for manual in those kinds of world. You just don't have time to do it. And once you're on the descent, set your flaps if required, open the windows, open the doors. If it's non-pressurized, there's no reason not to. And not only open your door, but open the handle, put it out, and then put the handle back down again. And what that'll do is keep the door frame from jamming in any incident. And you're way better off to have the door completely removed than all of a sudden find it's jammed and you have to get yourself out through a window. You got to remember, too, you don't know who's on board with you. You could have children, elderly. It all has a different effect on how you're going to handle the situation. The other one is, do you land in shallow water beside a shore, or do you put yourself into trees? What's the case? Well, as a pilot, you've kind of figured that stuff out. And if you've ever been in an emergency, and I've been in quite a few, you'll know that the training comes back at the snap of a finger, and you'll find yourself in a frame of mind that just at a glance, you've already made your decision and then just run with it. Unless there's something really obvious to make it better, carry on with that. When you're down to the actual water, if you're going to end up on wheels in water, obviously slower is better, but if it's glassy and things like that, make sure that you don't stall over the surface. And there's tricks there by throwing something out the window and circling back, but again, it's given time. But you want to land yourself basically nose high, especially because most nose gears with scissors, the nose gear is actually quite low in comparison to the main wheels, or even with them in some cases. But you want to land nose high, and some say put your feet in the brakes, some don't. I'm stuck on that one because I've never tried it. But nevertheless, put her down as slow as you can into wind, as close to shore or a boat or something that can help you, and have everybody already prepared with their belts on in the brace position. And you'd be aghast at how many people have no idea what the brace position is. So when you're doing your training in the spring and so on, and go over these things. But if you have your family members on a regular basis, they're really happy to sit and listen to all this at least once every year. And then, of course, once it's hit the water and it's on its back, then what I've always taught is the 1, 2, 3, 4 out the door. And this is based on, if you're a tri-pacer or any other airplane, it may differ because of the doors. But if you have the door on the pilot's side being your left, first thing you do, of course, is open the door if it isn't already gone. Grab onto the airframe, and you don't let go. And the reason is because that arm's telling you that's the way out. If you let go, then you're going to tumble. You're going to end up in the back of the aircraft. So hang on, and then and only then undo your seatbelt and out the door, preferably wearing your life vest. But if nothing else, take one with you if at all possible. And again, you're supposed to be wearing them now. It's going to be law for commercial, and do recommend it. But if you weren't wearing one, at least tear it out of the bag and stuff it in the front of your shirt so it's on your body when you get out. And from there on, it's basically up to what has happened, how many people you've gone board, how injuries may play into the game, and how far you are from shore. Colder the water, the more stressful and the more difficult things are going to be. So in any event, I hope that answers the question. If not, feel free to give me a call. I'm easy to find on the web anytime.
Excellent answer, Brian. One question here from Jeff Hodder. Your recommendations whether or not to have supplemental air in the case of water egress if trained to use it. I know my feeling as an ex-military guy that did egress training every couple of years. Yeah. But it's your show. I'll let you answer it.
Okay, you said the key words with training. I teach that. I've got the certificate, and I don't even like to put it out other than we do train, for example, SWAT teams. And every year they come to us, and every year they have to basically go through a training program strictly on the spare air, it's called. For a private individual to put that on the aircraft for safety, I don't think it's going to be a real bonus. And some people will disagree. But I'll tell you right now, if you're upside down, locked in the seat belts, or there's a reason that you need that spare air, If you don't administer it properly, you'll suck water into your lungs instantly. You're into the drowning phase on the spot. And I have seen 250-pound killing machines, ex-military who are on the police forces chasing bad guys all night with Uzis. I've seen them choking, vomiting, and having a very difficult time once we put them in the pool upside down and I drop them a rig. So from my personal point of view, I don't pursue that avenue at all. If it's military, and yeah, okay, I can understand that with training and retraining every single year, because if you're not onto it and you don't basically put the rig in and expel the air with enough exuberance, let's call it, you will suck in water. And I'll tell you, on the spot, you're done. There is no coming back from that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thanks, Brian. Another one here from Kevin Brown. How rough of water, height of waves would you go into in a cub on floats? It's kind of maybe a John question, but
yeah. I've done a lot of checkouts on Super Cubs, and they're a great little airplane because you can slow them down and they'll do racing things, but they do have their limitations. We always say knee high or less for most of these airplanes, but that isn't even the guide. It depends on the type of floats you got, your experience, and what kind of water you're landing in. Are they big rolling, coasters like we have here on the BC coast? We'll have rollers that are 12 feet high, and there's different ways of landing on that situation. So you become comfortable, whatever you took off on. If it was really a rough day getting out, look down and see how high that water was, because that's going to be worse on the landing at higher speeds.
Yeah. Well, hitting those wave caps will hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hard in the airplane, too.
A bit of an obvious one. Make sure your passenger briefing emphasizes not to inflate the vest in the aircraft. Couldn't agree with that one more.
Yeah.
And a question from Luc Vachon. Well, actually, there's two questions. One from Luke, one from Dave Jackson. They're kind of the same. Helicopter pilots tend to wear helmets. What are everyone's thoughts on helmets for seaplane pilots? And Luc Vachon says spray pilots wear helmets. Yep. Would they help with float plane survival? Probably.
It could. We train with helmets for the military, and they're quite cumbersome underwater.
Yes, they are.
So that make sure you got a quick release, not the business like a motorcycle handle. They're very hard to get off. So I'll put it to this way: when I was flying caravans, there was one other fella. He insisted on wearing a helmet. That was his thing. Nobody, looked left, right, or cared. Helicopter pilots, it dates back to the Vietnam War, was my understanding as to why they wore them. And then when they came to Canada as pilots, and other people got involved and thought it was a smart thing to do, but I never saw them pass them out through the helicopter to the passengers. So if it makes you feel safer and that's the way you want to basically fly, that's not a problem in my world. But just beware when you're upside down and you got to kind of put your head down your chest and sneak out a small window. That's where they do kind of get in the way. And they tend to churn a lot because they're not that tight on your head unless you own it yourself and basically have it fitted form to your skull.
Thanks for that, Brian. Question here from a Rene Francois Desmorais. I did helicopter egress training with an offshore company. Does it apply to airplanes? I can't answer that one. I would think that, getting out the door is the same whether you're in a helicopter or whether you're in an airplane, but there are some differences.
There's some big differences there. We do teach a lot of helicopter pilots. I'd say 30% of our business is helicopter. If a helicopter enters the water and it's under control, it's going straight in on skids unless it has actual inflation devices to hold it on the surface. As soon as it hits the water, being dependent on the rotor going left or right, counterclockwise or clockwise, when it tips to the side, which it's going to do, that leading blade grabs the water, and that's where the fun starts. The blade is probably going to explode, no questions asked, and then bang, you're going to be upside down. And the difference is a float plane has floats to hold it at the surface, even inverted, unless they've been compromised or torn off. A wheel plane, as soon as you open the door to go out, it's going to start the sinking procedure faster. It's already started through the wings. A helicopter has very little buoyancy in it whatsoever, period. And when they hit the water, it's a little quicker. You have to be reacting to it more so, but it doesn't really matter either way you want to get out. But a helicopter would tend to sink a lot quicker than a float plane, for example.
They got one here from Bruce Warwick. Did you ever hear about a forced wheel landing into water where at the last moment to dip a wing into the water and the plane will dig in, rotate, and pancake. This is to avoid flipping over.
That's new one to me. I do know of not one, but several that have gone into the water and been successful. One in particular happened in BC here years ago, about, I'm thinking it was 35 years ago. It was a 172. And the pilot did manage to land into the water out of gas, short of the runway at Penticton. And he landed upright, and lo and behold, he did unfortunately drown. But it was because he didn't take it serious. He was having a chat with the mic, talking to the tower as the airplane was sinking, and then he hadn't moved the seat back quick enough, and it rolled and went upside down, and he went to the bottom with it. I also know of 185, funnily enough, with the gear way ahead, who as well managed to come to a complete stop in the water, and then it sunk and they got out. But I always say expect the worst, hope for the best. So prepare for everything you possibly can, and then the outcome's going to be whatever basically fate has already decided.
And I've got one here. I don't know if it's for you or one of the other two guys. Do you have any experience with inflatable full Lotus floats?
Not my expertise. That's something I can't.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds to me like something that might go on either a wheeled airplane or something else.
Or an ultralight. Yeah.
Or an ultralight. Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps an ultralight. Okay. Let me just go through here. I think we've covered. What is the brace position if you have shoulder belts?
Okay, pilot or passenger would be the first question. For a pilot, I've had engine failures and ended up doing funny things, but you're hanging on to the stick for dear life. So you can't really do anything more than that right until impact. But you've got your shoulder harnesses on. As your body is thrust ahead on the impact, the elevator is just going to have no weight at that point at all and fall ahead. As a passenger, my advice has already been, and I'm sure the military guys agree to this, cross your arms and don't put your hands underneath the actual harness. Grab your shirt, hang on out here, and put your head down. And I think we don't need to comment on that because the military has done so many testing facilities over the years that I can't even keep track of it. But in all of the ones that I've researched where they actually take pictures and so on, every candidate, 100%, if they didn't have their arms crossed, went out like this every single time. And the ones that had their arms crossed actually did what they call the squint and squeeze, meaning that they were tucked in a ball. And what it does is protect your vital organs, but as well, when you get thrust ahead, you're already prepared for it instead of just being like a rag doll.
Awesome. We got one other one here from Jim Rowan. What should you do step by step now that you are upside down in the water without giving away your whole course?
Okay. I'm presuming it's in a light aircraft, 2 seats, 4 seats, and maybe 1 or 2 passengers. So you've already, I hope you've had enough time to discuss it. On takeoff and on landing, it happens, and there's no discussion. It's already over, and you're upside down before you've realized it. In a situation where you're coming in to land under control, then we go through what we just basically told you, and that is to get the airframe ready. As you're coming into the water, again, be all set. And as soon as it's gone upside down, then grab the door. After you've opened it, grab the frame. Under your seatbelt, if you have a passenger, reach over, and this has been done. We've probably got a man who's watching this right now who's involved in one out here at the BC coast. Grab the individual beside you, and if you're able, take them out with you. Again, that depends on your physical strength, your ability to handle stress, and not everybody can. I'll tell you right now, a fireman who goes in and out of burning buildings is a different person than somebody who is working in an office and never been put into a life-threatening situation. And the instinct there, because of their background, is considerably different. So if you had somebody beside you who was proficient in those fields, they're going to be thinking that before they go out the door, who can I save, and this, that, and the other. In most cases, people have one reason to get out that door, and that's for air, and they don't care about anything else. And that's the way it works. I've seen this 8,000 times in a pool and with people, and each person did it 6-8 times. So you can basically come up with some math there as to how many times. And rarely on the first inversion when we train does somebody come out with any sort of composure. It's usually, we'll try that again. Don't worry about it. We'll try this now. We'll take another breath and get back at it. And the beauty is, if you're in training, it doesn't matter what it is, in flight training or anything else, you're not in an emergency situation. So you can actually repeat the process if it doesn't work without wrecking aircraft or bending anything.
Right. There you go. I think you were talking about Tony McCormick, perhaps.
I wasn't going to use names, but that's my buddy.
He's online. He said, "Yes, sir, that's me, Brian, myself, and my nephew." So there you go.
Well, and
Another attaboy to you, sir. From Jim Neeson, I'm wondering about RV6s and 7s.
Yeah.
They have a tendency to flip over land or water. I'm wondering about lifting the nose at stall, hitting the water tail first, land wheels down and flip over, stall or tail, or question.
You know, I've got a lot of buddies with RVs, and they have all kinds of different bubbles. One bubble will come out to the side, the other slides to the back. So each one's its own world. I can't really tell you too much to do. Some say I'd eject the window. Some can do it, some can't. There's a little fear there. It could take the tail off on its way. But the big thing there is, and not everybody will agree with this, is I always take, if I'm flying in the bush, I have an axe with me. It's that simple. Wherever I go, I always have an axe. If I'm in a bubble airplane, I would suggest taking a normal axe, cutting the shoulder about that long on the shank, so that when you grab it, you can actually smash something. The Lexan these days is almost impenetrable. It'll take foot force to remove it. Plexiglass will smash. And I've taken plexi and proven all kinds of different things. And I've taken Lexan, put it in a deep freeze, brought it out, bent it over my knee, and I still can't break it. It's incredible stuff. So it depends what the material is on that particular airplane that you're flying, because it may have already come unglued or broken on an impact.
Right. Yeah, that would definitely be an issue with the bubble, trying to get that off, because otherwise, once that gets upside down, it's a pretty hard beast to get out of.
Very, yeah.
Yeah, start pulling away the metal panels on the other underside of it.
Yeah, there's different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's all of what I see here, Brian, directed mainly at you. So why don't we bring John and Brian back on to wrap up, and I'll just open the floor one last time for questions on anything else that anyone has, not necessarily for Brian the Dunker guy, but for anything else that we talked about previously that, okay.
And can you bring up the last slide, Peter, please? It has the email addresses for people that want to carry on.
Yeah, let me get, here we go. Okay, so that's that. And I do have, does anyone in Canada do inspections on Switlik PFDs? Does Capital Survival do them in Ottawa?
The answer is yes, they do it. And that's the only company that I can speak to. So I just had mine inspected. He inflated it for 24 hours, weighed the cartridges to make sure they were still good.
Okay, there's one I missed from Ken. Gotta go back and find it here. Any comments, safety tips unique to flying boats? Okay, I guess like
Lakers.
Lakers, yeah.
Well, the one thing is with flying a boat, you're on a hull like a boat. Literally, there's no protection between your feet and the ground, put it that way. If you hit a log with a flying boat, you're going to know it. No questions asked. Of course, with the power being, whether it's a tractor being pulling or pushing the prop up on top, they're a completely different animal to fly. I don't have boat time, so I can't speak in great context on that personally. But it's a different way to fly versus on a standard, basically catamaran float.
Okay, John or Brian?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have flying boat time either. The lake looks like a wonderful airplane, but I don't have any time in it.
I'm just a 172 guy.
Here you are.
Okay, I also got an answer from Debbie down on the East Coast, and she says that DSS Aviation in Dartmouth also inspects Switliks.
Oh, there you go.
Oh yeah, we had a question about porpoising on landing that Kevin Holder is experiencing from time to time on water, that is.
Well,
Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say 3 strikes, you're out. if you're going to porpoise. I'd get control of it right away. In commercial operations, that would be very rare because of the professional pilots flying them and experience. If you learn to fly and you do that, I'd say put the power on right away and go around. And if you want to basically ride it out to the end, it will go upside down because each one is more dramatic. It's basically like a wave, but the waves get closer and more violent as time goes on. So it could be a weight and balance issue, or it could be technique, but I'm looking at two faces who could probably take you out and teach you how to solve that issue.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards the technique, Brian, so thank you for that. Coming in too fast, coming in a little bit too nose low, landing with a tailwind, those things will all produce that same type of thing. As Brian mentioned, power up and go around, that's always number one. But if it's just starting, if you're just starting to feel the slight porpoising, stick back, that's critical. And ease that power off to a count of about 1, 2, 3. That should cure it. But if the porpoising is accelerating and getting worse, absolutely power on, go around, come in slower, nose up, and try to get that touchdown on this step, not on the forward part where the drag is creating that porpoising. So, yeah, a little extra training is always welcome. I would recommend a spring checkout.
Sounds to me like a brilliant answer, John. The same gentleman had a question about, could you comment on landing with floats going across the wave if the waves are too high to land into?
That's an ocean thing. I'm giving that to Brian.
Okay, we have that problem here, and I flew commercially here on the BC coast in beavers and otters and caravans. There was charts, and you can check the internet. They're all over the place. What it amounts to is, depending on the type of wave, if you're talking Atlantic or the BC Pacific coast, you'll get really beautiful big waves from 1,000 feet above. They don't look that bad, and you get down to it and you realize they're 15 feet high. In cases like that, you have to, again, basically check the chart and the wind speeds. We always said if it was 30 knots or more, you wouldn't land straight into the wind. You'd land on the top of the wave and then fall down away from it, meaning like if you think of a surfer on the top of the wave, if they went over the top, they're going to get tumbled. Same thing, stay on this side of the wave all the way down into the trough. And I did fly out of Alaska for a number of years when I was in Whitehorse. I went over to basically Ketchikan and Skagway, places like that, and they had huge waves. And it's amazing what an airplane will take, but they have limitations. So
right.
I wouldn't condone that activity. I'd take that as an emergency. You have, for whatever reason, got to put down on it. But I'd have the doors open, and I'd take it very serious if you're at a point where you can't figure out if you should top of the wave or into it.
So let that crest and land after the crest is what you're saying, Brian, if I understood you properly. Okay. Yeah, Georgian Bay waves is the answer. Question from Dave Padden. My PFD has a cartridge for inflation. How reliable is the indicator? It's been green since I bought it, but that was quite a few years ago.
I asked that question to Capital Survival when I brought mine in, and it's simply a matter of weighing the cartridge. They take the cartridge out and they weigh it, and if it's within parameters, then it's good to go.
Yep.
Okay.
Could I just add to that? We use old life vests in our training. I've got close to 1,000 of them that I've got in a box out in my shop right now. And we use them usually about 4 times maximum, because if you inflate them consistently, what will happen is it actually freezes around the inflation area where the CO2 goes,
right,
and it crystallizes that fabric. Over 10 years, even whether it hasn't been used and it's been packaged and tested, after 10 years, I'd be very dubious, because I've had several explode where just the side blows out of them with the good cartridge and the old fabric.
Okay. One from James Balash. I'm interested to hear if you have any particular tips for confined area takeoffs, aircraft and conditions, of course, dependent on conditions, on doing a confined area water takeoff.
Have a note.
Yeah, I was thinking you definitely want to know how long you've got before you run into the obstacle.
Yeah, there's no question you have to identify your no-go point and religiously stick with that, and then try another technique. Might be waiting for the winds to pick up. it might be, and that happened to me once. Spent a day waiting for the winds to pick up so I could get out. Be very careful on which lakes you get into. Much easier to get into a lake sometimes to get out. Obviously, the one float takeoff technique is important to practice, again, with your seasonal check flights or your own, to really maximize that shortest. Like John mentioned, using your VX airspeed in order to climb out of that lake. John, anything else?
Everything there is solid. And, the additional training helps, but maybe making the lake a little bit longer. Step taxi down to the back end and do a step turn if you're comfortable with that and the winds aren't too strong, and getting airborne a little bit earlier and then going to your best angle of climb. So a 90-degree step turn or a 180, if you're comfortable with that, that's another way of getting out of a confined area. I'm always very cautious about going into a confined area. Getting into those things is no problem. Getting out can be a significant problem. So I'm selective about the places I go into. And so really doing the precautionary, checking out for a valley at the far end, planning your departure before you plan your entry. Those are all things that come with a bit of experience and are really highly, it's going to give you a lot more pleasurable flying.
That's right. What I do, to be honest, is I hit Google Earth if I haven't gone to a lake before and it looks really short, and I measure it. I need 1 mile or I won't put my Luscombe in.
Oh, yeah, I like 1 mile.
Yeah.
1 mile's great.
Yeah. I won't go into the lake with my Luscombe without, because I don't have flaps, and on a hot day, it just plain needs a lot of water. That's that.
And as an instructor, people are always trying to force us to go into something smaller and smaller and smaller. And my answer is, well, when you get your own plane, give it a try.
Yeah.
But I've been there and done that, and I didn't enjoy it the first time. So I'm not going to do it for $35 an hour. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Right on. Okay, a couple of people have asked about where they can find the Seaplane checkout checklists. Sounds to me like it's probably a company thing.
Yeah, exactly. The companies all have them. Brian and I did ours just over the last week. I was kind of shocked at how much stuff there was on there. It's a lot to do, a lot of air work, and a lot of company exams to do. We did 10 exams, plus CRM, plus WMIS. So that is definitely a company thing. It's not Transport Canada.
Right on, thanks. Good little point from Nick Evans. He says that in ForeFlight, there's a 2-finger pitch method for measuring that distance of that lake that provides it in feet. But keep in mind the obstacles there. Then I think that's a great little hint from Nick.
Great, thanks, Nick.
Hello for Mick.
Yeah, shout out for Nick.
Yeah, he's a Harbor Air pilot.
Well, I was flying that Cessna 185 with the IO 550 last week, and we were using a new system with Sirius XM radio, and he had the weather system on it, and each lake had a little wind bar on it, and no matter what corner of the lake, he could touch that wind bar and tell exactly what the winds were. And we landed and looked around. Yeah, 240 at 6. Wow, 270 at 7. I mean, my whole job I just saw disappear in front of me. But it was so accurate. I am just amazed at how they do that. I'm so impressed. So if that's out there and available, it was a Garmin, and they use Sirius XM radio.
Yeah, and that's
cool.
something you can get is through COPA as well.
Is it? Oh, very nice. I got to talk to you about that then.
Okay, I got one more here. Just get back to it. Checklist. Okay. When using the lifting afloat method, which is best to lift, left or right?
Brian?
Sure. Boy, that's up to a lot. You'll read different things from different pilots. Typically, I use obviously I'm going to use the downwind float if I have any crosswind whatsoever. I tend to lift the right float, knowing that little left turning tendencies will push that left float a little harder into the water. So I find it's a little easier, therefore, to lift the right float.
Agreed.
Okay.
If I've got a stick in my airplane, if I lift the left one, I literally knock somebody's kneecap.
All right. I think we're getting towards the end of things. There was one comment here. I'll throw it out. The gentleman who owns a 170B with 180 horsepower in owner maintenance. It's hard to find instructors to do checkouts on my airplane.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I understand. That's one of the vagaries of the owner maintenance world, I think.
Well, I've flown the 170 with the original engine, so the 180, it must be just a real beautiful airplane now.
Yeah,
I know it's an upgrade a lot of the guys do, and it really improves that airplane a lot. It's aesthetically a wonderful airplane, and I have not flown it on floats, but I've flown it on wheels. And so, I agree it's hard to find somebody, but maybe you want to bring somebody along. You find a good seasoned float plane guy that doesn't have much 170 time. You spend a couple of hours with him, and then together you learn, together you advance, together you move forward. That's why I talked about flexibility. It's a good asset for your team to bring on a seasoned seaplane instructor that may not be as familiar with your airplane, but familiar with all the other techniques.
right on, John. Good words. One from Mark Talbot. Why don't insurance companies insist on getting your currency information annually?
Good question.
I don't know.
I would say they're being lenient, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, I've flown with a couple of guys that the insurance company demanded that we do the check flight, and they had quite a significant form, and that's how they kept. But these people were in their 70s, so I mean, the age was the factor at that point. But they were pretty diligent about it, and I enjoyed those flights because we knew what the expectations were.
Yeah. 70 is the new 50, by the way, in case you hadn't known.
Yeah.
Only for bikers.
One from Patrick Trottier. I was wondering whether you feel it'd be worthwhile to have a boating license to complement the float plane experience.
100%, absolutely. We asked for it at Lake Country. It's in the file, and you learn a lot doing that boat license.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. It's a boat on the water anyway. I mean, we're treated like a boat.
Yeah.
Except by the Sea-Doos.
True.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I think we've pretty much beaten down most of the questions.
I just got one.
Sorry?
Yep. The Cessna 206, I think most of us who fly airplanes are well aware that the rear door was always an issue, the cargo doors.
Yeah.
Okay. The problem finally, after I've flown a 206 the first time in about 1980, and I flew them right up until about a year ago, but the problem has finally been resolved.
Yeah.
Every engineer in Cessna and around the world took on that, including people like myself, sat in them and studied them, and we came up with every angle. And a little guy walked into the hangar, and he had his toolbox, got hired with a company here on the coast. He says, I got an idea. And he put on basically a flap device. So when the door opens, the flap goes with it down. In other words, it's a spring load.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's in the clear. If you check out Coast Dog Aviation, they're pretty proud of it. They've already sold so many of those kits that the guys can hardly keep up with it. Everybody I know who's flying a 206 commercially has already changed them. So anybody who owns 206s in the Copa world or knows somebody, let them know that's available. It's not cheap. It's, as usual, it's an airplane, so it's $10,000, but that includes everything you need, and it takes the engineer apparently about a half a day to do it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
There you go. Local Canadian ingenuity wins again.
You got it. Yeah.
So Martin Abud asked, and I think I know the answer, can you repeat the comment regarding which wing should be up first? And I think the answer was right wing. Correct, gentlemen?
That's my preference.
Torque and P factor.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, gents, I think we're drawing to a close, and we've been online for about 90 minutes. I think this has been a fantastic presentation from the three of you. A lot of personable inputs and a lot of experience together. I think we've got probably a couple of decades worth of brilliance that we've seen tonight, and I couldn't have imagined it being any better than it was. And I think we peaked out at about just under 380. So a good round for everyone. And gentlemen, I thank you very much. To all those who joined us tonight, my sincere thanks. As I said earlier, this will be online next week, later this week. I know a few people had connectivity issues, but the online presentation should be bug-free. So bid you adieu, and with anything else, I'll be saying bon nuit. Good night, gentlemen. Stay good on the West Coast there, Brian, and cheers, gents.
Thank you.
Night.
Yeah. Thanks, John, Brian. Have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.